I think most people will come to Van Gogh or Van Gogh knowing his self-portraiture, and so this exhibition of Van Gogh and the seasons will be revelatory, I think, for most people. What was it that drew him to paint so obsessively, you'd have to say, about the seasons?
Well, Van Gogh was a great lover of nature. He perceived something of a higher force in nature, and most of all that was true for the seasons, because the seasons gave him a feeling of eternity. It starts with spring, when things are sown and things start to bloom, and then the high blooming and the harvest in summer, and in autumn the shedding of the leaves, and then the bare fields in the winter, and then everything starts again. And that was a kind of magic to him that gave him feelings of eternity, of something on high, which is a kind of a religious feeling almost. But in the end, Van Gogh felt something about nature that really was for him very special.
When you came to put together this exhibition, what was your starting point?
Going through the letters, which is usually what you do with Van Gogh, and see not only you know what he painted, but what did he say about it. And that's the basic starting point. What did he say about it? What did he feel about it? What did he quote about it? So that's a basic thing you do with Van Gogh.
With this exhibition you can see the progression, can't you, from the early landscapes that he did in Holland and the grey skies of northern Europe to the sunny skies, the light, you can identify that with the light here in Australia, I'm sure, the light that struck him in southern France.
Yes, very bright, and by that time, of course, he had become even more interested in color than before, and he wanted to have the brightness, the fullness, the saturated colors that he saw also in Japanese art, for example, but also in the works of the Impressionists, and he wanted to have more of that. And living in Paris didn't agree with him, because he lived there for 2 years before going to the south, and then he wanted to see the bright colors of Japan, as he called it, and he thought he would find them in the south, and he did, and he compared it to Japan without ever having been to Japan, of course.
And Sjraar, we're standing in front of this extraordinary canvas that the colours will be just reaching out to the viewers. Obviously painted in the south of France, I think in Arles, am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah? And one of a series of paintings that he did of the harvest. Just take us through a typical day in his life, in the sense, if he was making a painting like this, would he go out and actually sit in the fields and
Absolutely, yeah.
then go back in his studio, or how did it work?
Yeah, he wrote to John Peter Russell, the great Australian artist who was a dear friend of his, that he was out in the fields all day to do things like this. So you would have to imagine him with his paints and canvases, going out in the fields and doing this on the spot, and then maybe retouch it lightly back in the studio. But this is what art historians have the strange name of wet in wet painting, which means that it's done on the spot, and the whole thing is done in one session.
One sitting,
yeah.
Virtually.
Yeah.
How important was music in his life?
It's difficult to tell. It must have been more important than you can tell from the letters, because the letters are, in that sense, they are wonderful documents, but they don't tell you everything about his life. So if he doesn't mention something, that doesn't mean that it was not of importance. So he must have been surrounded in his youth by music. He came from a bourgeois family where music would have played a role, singing together, playing the piano together, or maybe...
and in the church, of course,
in
too,
the church, where his father was
yeah.
a vicar. So, but he doesn't mention it a lot. He mentions Wagner
yes.
once.
Well, you talk about the tumultuous times in which he lived, and certainly artistically there were tumultuous times, weren't they, in the latter part of the 19th century, particularly in Paris, where there was
yes.
the anti-Wagner and pro-Wagner groups, arguing about the value of this extraordinary German composer's music. But he was pro-Wagner. I think he went to a lot of concerts with Theo.
He seemed to have to like it. We don't know much about it, and especially for the Paris period, illustrated, which is
Frustrating.
rather void of letters, because he lived with Theo, so he didn't write to Theo. So for 2 years we are not really well informed about his life in Paris, which is a bit
But if he was
sad.
mixing with people like Toulouse-Lautrec, he would have gone, to the cafes and clubs
Certainly.
in Paris, because live music was it then. This is pre-gramophone times, isn't
Yes,
it?
the cabarets.
Yeah, the cabaret,
Yeah, he would have heard an
absinthe.
yeah, but it is, with music, it is like Van Gogh must have visited many restaurants and doesn't talk about it. But he not only must he have done that. We know that he did it because he even wrote a small menu for some restaurant at some point. Some drawings are made on the back of bills he got,
Really?
which were then fit for small sketches. So, but we
Any
don't know
sketches
much
of musicians?
Yes, also, yeah. There are a few of musicians playing violin, so he must have visited a concert where he had his drawings materials with him.
Yeah.
So there is some evidence, but not a lot.
Yes, well, there's enough there, though, isn't there, when he talks about Beethoven, I think, in artistic terms, and then also Berlioz, whom he compares to himself, this artistic madness. He identified with Berlioz, this orchestral revolutionary. And, of course, he would have been probably in the company of people like Ravel and Milhaud and so forth, who were moving to the jazz age. There were so many influences around then.
Yeah, and he must have been aware of that. But his appreciation for music is unclear. Some things he obviously heard and appreciated, but it's not enough to establish his taste in music, or if he liked more popular music.
But the music of nature really was for him foremost, wasn't
Yes.
it? You can see from this exhibition.
Yes.
So in a sense, there's still this universal message from him, I guess. And you talk about tough times in the world in his time. I mean, the world was crazy then. It's still sadly crazy now. So you expect people who come to the exhibition to take consolation and take away the sense of the importance still of the natural world to mankind.
Yes, that would be one of the great aims of the exhibition, of any exhibition really. I think good exhibitions make you think about things, but works like this are really meant to give you a moment of beauty, of something to think about that takes you away from your daily problems. So I would hope that is Van Gogh's meaning, that is his message, and I think that people will not have a hard time seeing that and feeling that.